Picture yourself inside this super private elite VIP club. The bass is thumping, the liquor is pouring, and suddenly, whole room turns stone cold. Why? Because Michael Jordan is currently inches away from Rich Paul's nose, and he is definitely not grinning. We aren't talking about a standard polite greeting here. Mike has his mitt clamped on Rich's collarbone like he was simply going to drive him through concrete, and the glare in his eyes is that deadly stare he wore before. He swept the Piston squad in '91. The legend clearly hit his boiling point with this guy who has been seeking to destroy his history for nearly a lifetime. Rich Paul was standing there looking like he needed to disappear because his analytical, facts and media talking points don't mean a damn when the literal king of basketball is breathing down his neck. Just wait until you hear the wild trash Rich has been spewing about Mike behind the curtains. From tying Mike to the drug crisis to openly claiming Mike isn't the greatest player ever. See, if you believe the debate regarding who the greatest hoop legend of all time has been only about chips and stats, you are missing the hidden war that's been raging behind the curtain. There has been a calculated effort by Clutch Sports to change history before LeBron James finally steps away from the court. And frankly, it's getting pathetic. To comprehend why Michael Jordan was basically prepared to storm a Miami party to corner Rich Paul, you need to hear the garbage he kept pouring in our ears for years. It began with that Platinum Antlers quote back in 2023. Rich sat there on a broadcast and told us that LeBron's road was tougher because he had to fight Jordan's ghost from high school.
But I just think LeBron's antlers is in platinum and Michael's may be in gold. Why? Because when you think about, he had to be compared to Mike. Who did Mike have to be compared to?
Talk about it.
Picture the nerve of that. He's trying to manipulate you into believing that the pressure that LeBron bore with was a heavier weight than actually going out and destroying every single human being on a basketball floor for 15 years. Or the notion that dubbing yourself the chosen one on a magazine front is tougher than battling through the bad boy. Pistons physical attacks every night. It's a business strategy. Look, if you can't top MJ's 6 titles, you just try to make that record look simpler to obtain. But it got much bleaker on January 6th when Rich Paul went on the Max Kellerman show and stated the most absurd point I've ever heard. This man literally brought out a whiteboard to try to detail why the Jordan logo is dominant, and his reasoning was wild. He didn't credit MJ's 6 rings, or his brilliant business savvy. No, he credited the drug epidemic. I am not making this up. Rich argued the myth of Jordan wasn't based on basketball greatness, but because of the 80s and 90s street culture obsession with wealth and drugs.
These people had basically not even careers or high-paying jobs. They just had hustles. So now when you bring forth the crack epidemic, it created a revenue stream amongst a group of consumers that, number one, would have never had that dollar to spend.
He claimed, and I quote, "Folks didn't buy Jordans because they wished to be like Mike. They wished to be like Max, who drove the BMW with the hot girl."
And you used me as an example because I was sitting in front of you. You said, it's not that Michael Jordan did this, it's that the influencer who had the BMW or whatever you said, like Max with the fly girl and the BMW. So you're saying
what
that
I was saying was the hustler.
He's basically calling every MJ buyer simple-minded. He's claiming the most famous athlete in global history was just a right spot, right time dude who profited from a public crisis. He even tried to claim that Martin Lawrence and Will Smith did more for the kicks than Mike did. And to me, that was a lethal blow at the core of the Jordan name. MJ has forged a $4 billion empire on the concept of perfection, and Rich Paul is on a press run telling the globe it was really just drug dealer promotion and drug-era timing. This is the precise instant, the quiet version of Michael. Jordan died. You don't get to mock a man's base and his whole life's grind just to hype your client's name. And if you know Mike, you know 2 things he doesn't toy with are his history and his people. And Rich struck both. Look, Rich isn't just an agent. He's the builder of LeBron's image. And he knows that to promote his guy, he has to destroy the greatest. That's why he's reaching into the 80s to find reasons. He's out here claiming that MJ ran the game because there was no social media to sidetrack people. He clearly used the word timing as a weapon. simply hinting that if you dropped prime LeBron in '88, he'd be the guy with the 4 billion brand. But that misses the fact that MJ had to actually create the idea of the global icon. Before Mike, NBA players were mere men in tiny shorts. After him, they were gods. Rich tried to spin this as social alignment, but it's truly just a ploy to discount the sweat MJ put in to shift the culture. He even dared to claim MJ's money game was only strong because he understood contracts, as if that somehow makes the history less dominant. No, it proves he's sharper than everyone else, including the man Rich manages today. Yeah, LeBron. Yet, here is where it gets truly calculated. He pushed deeper and tried to sell this story that MJ had it, soft claiming Jordan's empire is a fraud since he hooped prior to 247 news cycles. No, he wouldn't quit there. He even claimed that modern media would have revealed Mike's off nights, which is comic since Rich Paul, the agent who actively engineers the press in LeBron's corner, is whining about Mike having it smooth. What made it certain that this was a calculated play was when Rich Paul tried to state Mike was shielded by writers like Peter Vexi, acting as if press in the 90s was a fan group. Yet anyone who was there knows that's a myth.
That's a whole nother thing that Mike never had to deal with because his hardest critic was probably Peter Vexi.
Yep. Straight up.
You see what I'm saying?
You see the pattern here? Every time
Rich opens his trap, he is sowing a doubt. If it isn't Mike got lucky with the times, it could be Mike was a product of the hype or Mike had it simple. It is a slow drip toxin built to erode the bedrock of Michael Jordan's status, so that when LeBron departs, the shifting to him being the undisputed king feels organic. Yet Michael Jordan spent his whole life reading plays on the floor, and he clocked this one from a mile back. So when Mike seized that shoulder in Miami, he was effectively warning Rich that you can own the channels and the press, and you can. Bring as many statisticians as you need, but you can't buy the aura people felt watching him in '98. And very soon, when we dig further into the real figures Mike had in that time, you are going to find that the fact is truly starker than the lore. But if you think the dust-up at the dinner was just a hallway skirmish, wait until you hear the cold facts of what went down and what Mike told him about the future of the clutch regime. Sources are noting Mike just made a play that could leave LeBron without a single friend in the league office. It all went down at a private party held at an exclusive VIP lounge in Miami. It was January and the bass was hitting so hard you could feel it in your bones. The spot teamed with NBA titans and Hollywood A-listers, talking the 1% of the 1%. But the moment Mike walked into Rich Paul's zone, that corporate Hollywood facade completely crumbled. Look, Rich, Paul is used to being the most insulated man in the room. He is the engineer, the man who moves LeBron like a chess pawn and hides behind PR strategies. But Mike is the eye of the storm. He is a predator who doesn't need a branding crew to tell you he is in charge. According to the witnesses who were close enough to the interaction, Michael didn't even raise his tone. He didn't have to. He stood there with that unlit cigar, staring down at Rich like he was back in Akron hawking jerseys out of his trunk. Mike leaned in and spoke the words that reportedly sent a shock wave through the whole lounge. You can own the press, you can own the kicks, but you don't get to own my history. With just one statement, Mike destroyed everything Rich Paul has spent 15 years building. When Mike said that, Rich was supposedly standing there with a glass in his grip, looking like he wished to dissolve into the floorboards. He is used to toying with GMs and owners who live by corporate codes. But Jordan doesn't live by those codes. No, and Mike wasn't. Done. He leaned in even closer and delivered the fatal blow. You don't get to rewrite my path because you can't. Sell yours. That was the ultimate gangster move. It was the death knell to the whole clutch strategy. Mike basically said, if LeBron's fable was actually better than mine, you wouldn't have to spend every podcast trying to tear me down. And if we are being real, he wasn't wrong. In the end, Jordan just let go of his shoulder, took a drag of his cigar, and walked away like the boss that he is. But if you think Mike stopped at just that, you don't know the black cat. While Rich was trying to salvage his dignity, Mike was already making calls. And rumor has it he just made a play that is going to leave LeBron without a single friend in the league office before he even starts his retirement run. And speaking of LeBron, See, if you think this was all just coming from Rich Paul's camp, you are dead wrong. Because while Rich is the one out here with the whiteboards and the reasons, LeBron himself has been playing a much foudatler, more passive-aggressive game for years. He won't say it to Mike's face, but he has been dropping these little digs for long ages. It became blatant after that 2016 Finals win. We all recall the clip from his More Than an Athlete series, where LeBron actually looked at the camera and named himself the greatest player of history. That specific title made me the greatest player of all time, for so many reasons. Personally, that was just such a petty and insecure act because Michael Jordan played 15 years, won 6 rings, and never once felt the need to tell a reporter, "Hey, by the way, I am the king." He just went out and proved it. So, by explicitly crowning himself, he effectively tried to say Jordan was number 2. It smacks of insecurity. The kind of thing you only say when you know, world lacks faith. Then there is that ghost remark. Back in 2016 Sports Illustrated pieces, Bron claimed his primary fuel remains that phantom he's hunting, the phantom who ruled in Chicago. Look, at the first glance, that reads like inspiration. Yet, when you dig further, labeling Mike a specter is the supreme passive-aggressive insult. A specter ain't a man. It's a spook, a lure, a shade that ain't truly real. By casting Mike as a wraith, Bron was aiming to reduce Jordan's reign into just a tall folktale, something which only persists since folks decided to believe in it, instead of a history that verifiably occurred. That's a typical clutch play. Attempt to spin the 90s into a bedtime story. Arc so Bron's lengthy career feels more rooted in actual hoops. We are absolutely about to destroy that. Durability hype real fast with the data to back it up. But if you need facts that Michael Jordan is seeing, past every inch of this false facade, just look at what happened to Kendrick Perkins. Big Perk was the absolute Jordan brand man. He was inked with them for years, scoring crates of new J's before they even reached the stores. But the moment he flipped, changed teams, and started screaming that LeBron James was his undisputed GOAT, the crates ceased. Perkins confirmed this on TV March 2025.
I used to get boxes in the mail all the time of the J's before they even hit the stores. I started my media career. As soon as I said that LeBron James was the GOAT, those boxes stopped coming.
Look, Michael Jordan ain't some distant retired tycoon relaxing on a golf green. No, he is the ultimate killer who takes it personally when the folks he's blessing try to burn his kingdom down. It's a warning to the rest of the league. You can pick your camp, but don't expect to rock the boss's kicks while you're plotting to snatch his throne. The wildest part of this drama is LeBron attempting the "I'm just a fan" move. In his March 2025 sit-down on the Pat McAfee show, LeBron confessed that he and MJ don't speak.
Who, me and Michael?
Jordan.
Yeah, we're a good spot.
Therefore,
We don't talk.
He tried to frame it as being about his own focus on the grind, claiming he hopes they'll chat more when he departs. But let's be frank, MJ only talks to the dudes he rates like Luka Doncic. If he ain't speaking to LeBron, it's because he stares past the false image. MJ is the most untouchable icon in sports for a reason. He knows that if he cracks the gate to LeBron, it just feeds the clutch engine more footage to utilize for their next production. Recall when we spoke earlier about how Rich Paul is always citing LeBron's long tenure? Well, let's dive into the true motive. He is so eager to sell us on the durability. It is because when you really look at a player's prime, when you stare at what a human being is capable of, at the ultimate apex of their powers, LeBron ain't just behind Jordan. He is not even in the same stratosphere. Look, Rich Paul wants you to focus on the long tenure, the total, points, and the piled up stats. Why? Because the compiling is the only area LeBron wins. But in the realm of Michael Jordan and truly any self-respecting NBA baller, we don't celebrate how long you stood on the floor. We celebrate what you did to the rival squad standing across from you. Let's talk about '88. In the history of basketball, this is what I personally like to dub the year of the greatest. In a solitary season, Michael Jordan didn't just win the MVP, he took Defensive Player of the Year while pacing the league and scoring with 35 points per game. For context, that means he was the top offensive player on the planet and the most frightening defensive player at the exact same time. He led the league in steals at 3.16 steals per game and was swatting shots like a center. Now compare that to LeBron. In 23 years, LeBron James has 0 DPOY awards. Nada. He spent over 2 decades trying to reach that peak once, and he couldn't do it. The closest he came was in 2013 when he famously lost to Marc Gasol. And look, Klutch has spent years trying to spin that as a snub, but the numbers say otherwise. Marc Gasol anchored the top defense in Memphis and had the advanced metrics to prove he was the anchor. And in just 15 years, MJ made the all-defensive first team 9 times. LeBron's only made it 5 times in 23 years. That's the difference. Between a guy who could play defense and a beast who lived to break your spirit on both ends, don't even get me started. On the scoring, MJ has 10 scoring titles and 11 full seasons with the Bulls. LeBron's won 1 in 23 years. But here's the twisted part. We'll get into how Rich Paul actually tries to paint MJ's buckets as a bad thing. He's out here on podcasts trying to claim that MJ's high usage and scoring obsession made it tougher for his teammates. Really, Rich? Because last I checked, that flaw earned a perfect 6 for 6 finals record. Meanwhile, LeBron's so-called playmaking has resulted in 6 finals losses. But the most desperate move Klutch Sports pulled was the illegal defense narrative. LeBron loves to talk about how the 90s didn't have zone defense, implying that MJ just opened wide paths to the hoop. Man, that is pure rubbish. They need you believing the 90s were simple because of one rule change while omitting the reality that the Jordan rules lived. Detroit's game plan for stopping Mike back in that specific era was to physically snap every single bone in his frame until he could not walk. Just picture catching Rick Mahorn's elbow in your sternum or Bill Laimbeer attempting to rip your head off each time you drove for a score. In those days, was no spacing talk or freedom of motion like we see now. Still, this guy had the nerve to claim Mike had it. Soft. In that age, illegal defense only meant you must stick by your guy. But hand-checking was allowed. If you dropped a peak Chicago Bull in this soft league, where you cannot even touch a superstar without a foul, he would surely not merely be the scoring king. He would average 50 a game. Rich Paul attempts to use the term timing to diminish the 90s. However, the reality is, the 90s were a battlefield. The Pat Riley Knicks and those bad boy Pistons were the most vicious squads you might ever meet. Mike did not just endure that, he owned it. Now let us tackle the most sad talking point. In their entire script, the notion that Mike fled in 93. They try to spin his departure as a frailty or a void of grit compared to James's drawn-out 23-year run. But that is simply since they do not grasp the psyche of a champion. Michael Jordan did not fold. He completed the mission. He scaled the peak, stared about, and saw. There was no one left to kill and exited as king in 93. He grew dull, returned, and exited as king again in 98 like it was his destiny. James is currently stat-chasing into his 40s, hunting a huge scoring title, but Jordan did not need 23 seasons to show he was the master. He did it in 15. As Mike told Rich Paul in that Florida club, you can remain in this league as long as you wish, but do not insult the finest baller that ever walked on the hardwood. It's just that plain. Recall when we spoke about Rich Paul trying to spin Mike's buckets as a flaw? Well, he is still out there on every show possible, trying to trap Mike into this single skill box. He will look you in the face and claim Mike was only a shooter or simply the man you need for the final clutch play.
I said, yeah, if I'm starting a team, I'm taking LeBron number 1. I'm still taking LeBron number 1. And I would take MJ to take the last shot.
It is a sly way of implying Mike lacked the brains or the vision that James holds, but that's where the theoretical talk dies and the real stats take charge. Let us view the 1991 finals. This was the absolute shifting of the crown event. Jordan against Magic Johnson. The story going in was precisely what Rich Paul is, selling now that Mike was a greedy gunner. So, what did greedy Mike do? He went out and averaged 31.2, 11.4 dimes, 6.6 boards, while hitting a crazy 55.8%. To make that clear, he did not just drop Magic. He outpassed the best distributor to ever breathe in his own series. Rich won't care to discuss the 11.4 helpers per night. He would rather stick with his myths and insults and claim James is the best to ever lace up simply because he lasted.
But we know who the best player ever is. His name is LeBron James.
But we spot the game. True fans know the 2025-26 news cycle has seemed more like a solid promo run than a competitive season. There are whispers across the association about agency plants in huge networks like ESPN, and the usual suspects steadily driving the duration viewpoint. They need you to trust that a gathered sum is the same thing as power. But you cannot purchase a legend. That is why this Florida Gala shifts everything. It signals the death of the silent days where Mike would just puff his stogie and tune out the hype. So, I leave you with this thought. Who do you back? Do you back the icon who went 6 for 6, never let a series hit Game 7, and crushed every rival in his lane? Or do you back a rep who requires a chart and a whole media run to show why his guy is top tier? In the 90s, squads had to triple team Mike on the wood just to slow him. In 2026, Rich Paul has to triple team the press just to keep James in the mix.